Good evening. Welcome to Northbeat. I'm Joseph Ho in Whitehorse. We begin tonight in the Yukon, where the territorial government says it was notified 10 times this school year about allegations of harm or abuse towards students. The government says this shows its Safer Schools action plan is working. The plan was created to avoid communication failures about abuse and harm in schools. But as Virginie Ann reports, it appears in at least one case, communication remains unclear.
The Yukon government confirmed that a part-time teacher under investigation for allegations of harm towards students was able to go work for several days in May at a different school in Whitehorse. As to why it happened,
the reason it happened was a computer glitch. So we fixed that now. And we are very sorry that that happened.
this was the government's initial response. However, the education department later corrected that statement to say Louise Shellington was inaccurate. A department spokesperson says it was the school who used their own call-out list for teachers instead of the territory's dispatch system. For the president of the Yukon Association of Education Professionals, it seems nobody had the correct information about the teacher, and he questions who's asleep at the wheel.
What was unfortunate is that there was no communication to other schools or other principals that there was a situation that would prevent this TOC from working in another school. It was a communication boondoggle as well as someone not monitoring at the department level.
The Yukon government says that teacher no longer works in the school system for now. Meanwhile, Upe says that he agrees that the Safer Schools action plan allows for better monitoring, but he says the department still needs to improve its communication. Virginie Ann, CBC News, Whitehorse.
Still in the Yukon, more than a dozen people in Old Crow were evacuated from their homes over the weekend. They sheltered at the local school until late Saturday afternoon. On Friday, the Porcupine River looked like it was going to overflow. That came after the forming of a 10-kilometer-long ice jam. The river rose by more than 5 meters in 24 hours. On Sunday, an evacuation alert for parts of Old Crow was lifted. Water levels on the river are now below flood levels. The Yukon's Emergency Management Organization is still keeping an eye on the situation. The Northwest Territories government is warning Fort McPherson residents about rising water levels. Water on the Peel River has risen by 2 meters in the last 12 hours. The river also rose by 3 meters over the weekend. The Department of Environment says cabin owners along the river, as well as those in the community, should be cautious of high water during breakup. Still in the NWT, a Yellowknife researcher is shocked by what he learned combing through historic documents about Giant Mine. According to archived letters and water samples, officials knew about arsenic pollution early on. The documents date back to when the mine was opened. Leni Lamberink has more.
This is a letter from one federal health official to another back in 1949. Just a copy, not the original. And it shows that those health officials knew early on that arsenic pollution from Con and Giant gold mines was a problem. The letter says 2 men were hospitalized with arsenic poisoning just a few weeks after the roaster at Giant was put into operation. 6 cows were poisoned. Other wildlife died too. A recently published study looks at this letter and more than 500 other archived correspondence about Yellowknife's gold mines between 1949 and 1956. The report says Con Mine was able to bring its arsenic emissions down early on, but Giant didn't meaningfully do so until years later. The study concludes that Giant continued to operate despite knowing the risk it was causing to the public. It spat out more than 2,000 tons of arsenic trioxide per year until 1955.
You can actually see the dust coming to our community of Delo and Deda, and it just falls all over the place.
Chief Ernest Betsina says these old letters confirm what elders have been saying.
My members has remembered the stories and the sad history, the sad legacy of Giant Mine with losing some of our children, with losing some of our dogs, and the devastation that come with it. And yeah, it does confirm that my people are telling the truth.
Betsina is familiar with the story, but Mike Palmer, the lead author of this research paper, he was surprised. He's been studying arsenic around Yellowknife for more than a decade.
Like the narrative I had heard, living in Yellowknife for 20 years, is that the pollution that was happening at Giant and these subsequent public health effects were really a surprise. And as soon as people noticed that there was mitigation measures put in place to stop them.
But that's not what happened. The head of a lab within the Department of National Health and Welfare wrote that letter you saw earlier. He called for gold roasting to stop until better environmental protections were put in place. The Northwest Territories Council, which governed the territory at the time, said no.
By 1951, there's a real effort from Giant in particular to really try to cut down on those emissions. When it didn't work, I mean, they didn't stop producing. They kept producing, and they actually increased production at some points.
The Yellowknives Dene First Nation has been pushing the federal government for an apology and for compensation for the harm that Giant Mine inflicted. Palmer hopes that his study and the documents that it's shed light on can be used as evidence in that process. Leni Lambrink, CBC News, Yellowknife.
After more than 2 decades in operation, the Davic Diamond Mine is getting ready to close. But the mine cannot clean up or shut down until it gets a new water license. First Nations are voicing their concerns even before the license hearings get started. Nadir Hashmi reports.
The Lutsulke Dene First Nation says Indigenous traditional knowledge should play a bigger role in Davic's closure plans. They say this in a letter to the Wakaji Land and Water Board, the board that will decide on the water license. It's especially critical to the Lac de Gras Lake, which surrounds the Davic mine. Many First Nation communities want to feel safe using the water again. The Davic mine is expected to be the first of the Northwest Territories' 3 diamond mines to close. A new water license is critical because it covers all water use and water discharge during cleanup and beyond. The current license expires at the end of this year. The Lutsulke Dene First Nation urged the condition to be added, a requirement for Davic to seek approval from a panel of traditional knowledge holders for all closure decisions. They said science alone will not instill confidence in the community that water is safe to drink, fish are safe to eat. And only when scientists and traditional knowledge holders agree on these issues will the mine closure be deemed successful. The Yellowknife Dene First Nation also raised similar concerns. They point to conflicting perspectives when it comes to water quality around the site. They say Davic's science-based approach to sampling suggests the water quality is acceptable, while traditional knowledge studies show otherwise. The First Nation says its most recent water study found only 2 out of 15 fishes caught were healthy enough to eat. Another Indigenous government is more optimistic about Davic's closure plans. The Clecho government says it hopes the closure leaves a positive legacy and doesn't repeat the damage seen at older sites like Giant Mine or the Colomac Mine. The First Nation says it's watching Davic's cleanup closely.
Both from a technical perspective and from the elders' traditional and cultural perspective, when we go on site, we see that cleanup work that's already been completed as really positive.
Still, Wheeler says they want to see thorough water testing done before the mine closes. A public hearing on the water license renewal will be held in Betchikon, June 10th to June 12th. Nadir Hashmi, CBC News, Yellowknife.
Yellowknife MLA Kieran Testard is proposing changes to workers' compensation for sick, injured first responders. The changes would make it easier to get compensation for post-traumatic stress disorder, cancer, and heart disease. It's called presumptive coverage. That means there's an assumption the condition or illness is work-related, and the process to prove that is more straightforward. The aim is to make things less stressful and more efficient for workers who may already be suffering.
That being the only now then barrier is getting that diagnosis and not having to constantly retell your story. You're already told your story to the registered psychologist or the doctor, and you don't have to now go through a bureaucratic process of reliving the thing that is causing you that post-traumatic stress and putting you into crisis continuously and constantly through a bureaucratic process.
First responders don't have access to the same levels of workers' compensation in the NWT as the rest of Canada. Despite spending years asking for support, the process has always moved too slowly to actually result in the changes these heroes need when they get sick.
The proposed act would apply to police officers, nurses, paramedics, correctional officers, and sheriffs. It would also apply to dispatch operators and continuing care assistants. Testart says he will introduce his private member's bill on Thursday. If passed, the changes would take effect in the NWT by October next year. Canada's Auditor General says the Nunavut Housing Corporation needs to do more to ensure equal access to public housing. In a report published today, Andrew Hayes laid out multiple shortcomings. The report says the corporation has poor oversight of wait lists, and it did not appear to know whether the most vulnerable Nunavummiut are receiving housing. The report says units needed maintenance and they need to be more accessible for elders and those with disabilities. It also says the corporation faces challenges to meet its target of 3,000 new housing units by 2030. Last year, the Nunavut government promised to pay for accessible transportation for elders across the territory, but that announcement did not include money to actually run those vehicles. And 7 months later, there is still no service. Carl Cardinal has more.
In 2024, the Nunavut government gave roughly $1 million to non-profit group Northern Future Skills Development to buy 5 wheelchair-accessible vans. One in Iqaluit, Cambridge Bay, Coral Harbour, Pennington, and Rankin Inlet. The agreement will mean free services all year long for elders, but the budget did not include funding for operations, like staff, dispatch system, fuel, and maintenance. That responsibility was left to the nonprofit, and they're struggling to find the money. Stephanie Boulay is the Executive Director for Northern Future Skills Development.
I don't want to say that we will change our goal, but if we cannot secure full funding, we might have to revisit the project goal or our vision.
Boulay says they've applied for funding to Hamlet's Inuit organization and the federal government, but the process is slow. George Higgs is a member of the Legislative Assembly of Nunavut. He says this points to a bigger problem with the government spending money without thinking things through.
Again, the lack of strategic planning and developing policies and not making knee-jerk reactions. That was nearly $1 million in funds being expended, and to what avail at this time?
For now, the vans remain parked in storage. CBC has requested an interview with the GN, but they declined. Carl Cardinal, CBC News, Iqaluit.
The Hulik Energy Corporation says it is badly short-staffed. It says the staff shortage contributed to multiple power outages in Nunavut this winter. The corporation says it's working to fix the problem, but there are multiple factors at play. TJ Deere tells us more.
There have been power outages in Iqaluit throughout the winter, including during a rare blizzard in May. The territory's power corporation says they've been facing capacity issues. Ernest Douglas is the president and CEO of the Hulik Energy Corporation. He says only 4 of the city's 6 generators are operational.
One is a brand new generator that's not actually hooked up to the system yet, and it will be shortly. The other one is not operational and will be replaced in the near future.
He admitted there was limited staff at the plant during the recent blizzard and said QEC can do better, but the conditions made things difficult.
And I know there's a different view from when folks are at home in a blizzard, wondering why they have no power, but there's a very good reason why the power was out that day.
The minister responsible for the corporation also spoke about the generators. During question period on Friday, John Main said their new generators come from Europe.
The supply chain in terms of trying to get spare parts as they're needed across the Atlantic Ocean do impact us in terms of trying to make timely repairs.
This month's blizzard also raised concerns about recruiting and retaining qualified staff. Maine said the corporation is looking at its employees' pay to address this. TJ Deer, CBC News, Iqaluit.
King Charles and Queen Camilla have arrived in Canada. The visit comes one day before Charles delivers the speech from the throne. That starts the new session of Parliament. This is his 20th trip to Canada, but his first as king. It's a symbolic visit to underscore Canada's sovereignty. Marina von Stackelberg reports.
A royal welcome to Canada's king. Charles and Camilla are in the capital for a short but significant trip. The visit is meant to show the United States that Canada is not interested in becoming its 51st state.
God save the king! God save the king!
Ottawa wants to remind the world, unlike the U.S., Canada is a constitutional monarchy and a sovereign nation.
So it's a good day for Canada.
Prime Minister Mark Carney personally requested the royal visit. He has repeatedly pointed to Canada's founding by British, French, and Indigenous peoples as one of the ways Canada is fundamentally different than its neighbor to the south.
Canada is Canada and will never be anything else.
It reinforces that we are a sovereign nation, having the king here, and that we're not for sale.
In the theme of Canadian pride, the king was part of a ceremonial puck drop. He mingled with the packed crowd, keen to catch a sight of the royals.
I only got a glimpse of them, but I'm still so happy to be here.
Our tradition and heritage comes from the monarchy, and we're grateful.
Their Majesties toured a farmer's market.
The king asked me about the radishes. He said, my goodness, those are beautiful radishes.
It's a nod to the push to buy local Canadian goods in the thick of a trade war.
We're Canadians. We're a strong nation. We're a sovereign nation. We need to stay that way, and we can do this. We can get through these tough times together as a nation.
And at Rideau Hall, the King's official residence in Canada, Charles planted a tree and had a meeting with the Governor General. Here on Tuesday will be the main event. From inside the Senate, the King will deliver the speech from the throne. He's the first monarch to do that in nearly 50 years. It will lay out this new government's priorities and vision for the future of Canada. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada's system of government relies heavily on traditions from the British Parliament. As King Charles prepares to deliver the speech from the throne, Eli Glasner takes a look at the pomp, ceremony, and rituals surrounding it.
A message from Her Excellency the Governor General.
So here we are again, the speech from the throne.
Congratulations.
Together we move Canada forward.
Je suis heureuse d'ouvrir la première session.
And a ceremony stuffed with symbolism.
A message from Her Majesty.
It's really about the tension between Parliament and the monarchy.
Mr. Speaker.
All the more appropriate because for the opening of the 45th session of Parliament, the King himself will read the speech, as opposed to the Governor General, who typically represents the Crown. On the big day, all eyes are on the Usher of the Black Rod, a senior parliamentary protocol officer who plays a pivotal role, including inviting the MPs to the Senate to hear the speech. And that is where the drama begins.
Usher of the Black Rod is just getting close to the doors of the House of Commons. Those doors will be slammed shut in the face of the usher. And this is symbolic.
Incredibly rude.
Yes, it can be incredibly rude. It is the House of Commons demonstrating their independence from the Crown.
At which point the usher knocks. Speech after speech, there's always been 3 knocks at the door. So what's with the closed doors and the knocking? Well, it goes back to the 17th century and a king who didn't respect the independence of the house.
During the 17th century, there was a major power struggle between the Crown and Parliament. During the reign of Charles I, Parliament felt that its rights were being circumscribed and that the king was acting arbitrarily.
And then in 1642, things really took a turn.
In the lead up to the English Civil War, Charles I brought soldiers and went into the floor of the then English House of Commons, seeking to arrest Oliver Cromwell, John Pym, and 3 other senior parliamentarians who, to the king, were threatening a civil war.
Which in part brought about the English Civil War and the execution of King Charles I.
Who rules England, a king or parliament? The Civil War decided the answer is parliament.
Which brings us back to the Usher of the Black Rod, who as the Crown's representative must knock and request permission before entering the House of Commons.
The key point here is Black Rod cannot simply barge in and demand that the Commons come to hear the speech. Black Rod has to ask to be admitted, and the Commons have to agree that they will come.
Not all Black Rods are the same. The original was lost in the parliamentary fire of 1916. The replacement was snapped in half in 1967 and glued back together. After all the wear and tear, a new rod was restored as a gift for the Queen in 2016.
And that it is time for them to attend. And now
once the MPs follow the Usher of the Black Rod to the Senate, you may notice another object that's part of the procession, the mace.
Going back to medieval times, the mace was a weapon of war to defend initially the king, and then it became appropriated by the House of Commons.
The mace is important because it represents royal authority. The mace has to be present in the room for either house to conduct business.
We resume what day?
In fact, in the British Parliament during the Brexit debates, one MP put this to the test, grabbing the mace. He didn't get very far. With the royal robes and rods and maces, it might be tempting to see these traditions as relics from the past. But historians say, if anything, they're more relevant than ever.
At this particular time in the world, when democracy, legal rights are under challenge in many countries, I think it's very important for us to remember that we have these rights and why we have these rights, that people died to secure these rights for us, and that we should appreciate them.
That was CBC's Eli Glasner. A Cree woman in Saskatchewan is proving that it's never too late to learn. Louise Fraser has just completed her education degree. She is 87 years old, and she is so passionate about her language, she went back to school.
Louise Fraser, Mr. Wasis Nehewak.
When I was a child, I was fluent in the Cree language because I heard it all the time at home from my family. But when I went to residential school, I was not able to use my language anymore. Residential school really changed me. I didn't want to be involved with my culture anymore and the language at that time. I knew as a young person, a teenager, that I would have to get some education and some training because there was nothing like that on the reserve. I tried many ways to try and get it back. It just was it was in my head, but I couldn't get the words out. And then I heard about how our languages, not many people are speaking the language anymore. Parents aren't speaking the language to their children. And then I thought going back to school would be a way of getting it back. I did take some Indigenous languages classes a while ago, about 10 years ago. I couldn't teach the language because I didn't have a certificate. I decided, well, maybe I'll go back to school so I can get a teaching certificate so that I could teach a language. And that was my goal all along. I felt out of place with all the young students around me, but I just keep thinking about my goal, and that kept me in my program.
Youth from the Northwest Territories with big dreams got a chance to flex their muscles on Saturday before Olympic Scouts. RBC's training ground program was in Yellowknife, testing young athletes for their speed, strength, endurance, and power. The program is about finding potential for Olympic sports. This was the first time it came to the territory. The program connects youth with coaches for many sports, including biathlon, rugby, speed skating, and volleyball, even bobsleigh. That is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, head to cbc.ca/north. We'll leave you with images from King Charles and Camilla's last visit to Canada in May 2022. Here they are in Yellowknife and Deda, Northwest Territories. Their visit focused on reconciliation and the environment. I'm Joseph Ho. Thank you for watching. Good night from Whitehorse.
So it's the same thing. Yeah, but yeah, so it's a spray first. Tie, tie, T, T.